我叫唐敏，唐桥的唐，敏捷的敏。我出生的地方是美国内华达州拉斯维加斯，已经来台湾快40年。
What was the original intention and kind of thing that brought you out to Taiwan?
This particular friend who was working with indigenous people in Taiwan dared me to come with her.
She dared you.
So before I came to Taiwan, it's like I thought Taiwan was Austronesian.
Oh.
And it is.
It is, yeah. But that was your impression of it before you came here.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I grappled with the idea of to be Taiwanese as many things.
So like when you came here though, you're like, okay, I'm technically going to the Republic of China.
Called it Taiwan. I've always called it Taiwan. But it was very clear that Taiwan was in a time of big transition, very tense. But at the same was very exciting for a young person. First year or two, after martial law had been lifted, the people I lived with was a 16-year-old when I came. I traveled
To China with her, wow.
For the first time in 50 years. I was the vehicle for communicating all the things that they wanted to relay to my landlady, basically.
Why? It's just too sensitive or
sensitive,
too...
very difficult, painful. Her children did not fare well, the ones who stayed. They were the concept of Hai Bao, Taiwan Bao. Because the people I knew were filmmakers, a lot of context when I first came to Taiwan was through challenging the status quo culture and trying to tell the Taiwanese stories that you could talk about the White Terror, 228 incident, things that happened in martial law. We translated almost all of the early films.
You translated all those movies?
City of Sadness, yeah.
Really? My roommate just watched that yesterday.
Puppet Master, 活着.
How do you think that helps you understand what Taiwanese identity was?
You will use different terms that are kind of code for where you are in this identity.
Is this like the difference between saying 中国 and 大陆?
Or 中华民国,
in Taiwan.
华人 versus 台湾人 or 中国人. It's an evolving thing and it's global politics creating identity in response to
the threat.
Well, it wasn't even hardly a threat the first 10, 20 years, but if you live in Jinmen, it was different.
Yeah.
Also, the whole Jinmen identity thing is an interesting thing. Jinmen people who, of course, still have relatives right across the bay there.
Well, they get their water from there now.
After I'd been here 9 months, I was making Taiwan my home. Curiosity, it really served me here. Whereas in the States, you just don't get exposed to so much happening in such a small place, whether it be cultural things, social things, or political things. At some point, I just decided to learn Chinese and did as little work as was necessary. We went to Meiya Chinese cram school, but it was
is that by Chad?
Yeah, Chad. You know Chad?
I used to take Chad's class. Chad
like,
is intense.
But his teachers were ones that had training in Chinese as a second language, which was really a very new thing. We did a lot of reading. Understanding the written language was very important to me because I went into translation pretty fast. It was very inconvenient to get deported in 1993.
You guys deported?
So, Taiwan had just passed the Employment Services Act, but there was no way to actually apply. So we tried and tried and tried. We were as frustrated as the police were, but the police just started enforcing it. They actually used a document that showed I paid taxes.
To prove that you'd been here?
And that I was working. So it was required to leave. And Philip was arrested. Very fortunately, found a young human rights lawyer who defended us. We were the case that pushed a lot of it forward. Got quite a bit of press. We had legal recourse because we knew how things worked. We were popular because we were doing good things. So people stood up and supported us.
The translations kind of put Taiwan's message out there.
Sure.
Though.
I'll say 3 projects that were milestones for Taiwan in communicating about itself. One was early version of the Invest in Taiwan industry areas, the sector areas. This is what it means to live in Taiwan.
Oh, you wrote that?
We wrote it.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And then we translated it into Chinese. So it would help them so much. They would be able to hand the English thing, but also have Chinese reflect more explanatory. Major shift for the government in how to communicate to non-government people. If you went to an office 20 years ago, you would get Gongwen. Taiwan has really learned that, it can be really important to just tell people in more colloquial, easy to understand, normal language. We also did
SARS?
Yeah, it just was like, oh my God, we don't have a way to communicate about this to the rest of the world. The CDC didn't have an English-speaking outlet, so we stepped up and actually offered to do that. No pay, nothing, just did it. Send us the updates. We'll put up an emergency website for the government to be able to tell the rest of the world what the status of SARS and SARS response was at the time. We were one of the first digitized translation companies, and we were the first to digitize typesetting of archaic Chinese. We have worked with a lot of academic organizations, say Buddhist texts. If you want to print it out, somebody has to know how to actually get the computer and all the software and eventually the printer and stuff to actually print it. And then that led to other digital technology, like we localized Nokia's first handset. The software they put into it, it was the standard for a long time. I mean, we're really just totally into this thing. There was a period where actually I did an ISP business. We were the first private ones.
So could I say you brought the internet to Taiwan?
Don't say that. No. The things that hadn't really started and they weren't taking it very seriously was Zhonghua Telecom. They didn't give you service, the customer service and stuff. We did it because as a translation company, we just, of course, it made sense to send documents to really facilitate the translation process or our project process, because the best translators are not always going to be next door or even in a convenient time zone. So we started out with an internal bulletin board, and then it grew into an internet service. And
what does that even look like? Like, it just seems kind of like magic.
Well,
you're like plugging it into the phone, or?
Yeah, you had modems, leased lines. The endpoint is usually a router, but it can also be a switch. But
wow.
I was a technical
crazy.
marketing person for that. So we came from an angle of an opportunity for openness and making things transparent, allowing people who wouldn't have a voice to have a voice. More of an egalitarian democracy where everybody can just put it out there. Not everybody will be read, but in the days when there's not that much online, that seemed pretty cool. Then so a lot of things shifted. Capitalism is what decides whether or not you want to make money from it. Commodification, which is different.
Different than just the pure curiosity.
Yeah, or having a function, meeting needs, and it's not necessarily tied together. We have platforms for sharing things that they're free, but not really, because you exchange your personal information. The advertising model is the only model, so it's about gaining attention. So this is how I got where I am now with beyond growth, post growth. The feel-good one is called the well-being economy. Taking the economic paradigm away from a GDP-driven objective or goal. We have this incentive always to grow things, and we have to all the time. And disasters are good for GDP, always.
Yeah, like starting a war.
Yeah, for example.
Yeah.
And it's created value by enclosing everything off and commoditizing it. Like I have some elderly indigenous, they really did not use money.
Here in Taiwan?
Absolutely, there are 100 or so now. And if you ask them, what's the biggest difference as a young woman and now? They'll instantly say, now everything you need money. It wasn't even a part of her mindset.
It's going to sound dumb, but it's like, what did they value then?
Living, being able to hunt, getting their needs met. It's not that didn't desire things. You had nature's bounty as being the major source of your values, your wealth. There are places that absolutely need to expand their economy for that get basic needs met. It's reducing where it's spinning itself to spin itself. The things that are being built are multiple properties everywhere, and the only reason that they buy these other properties is mostly just to park their wealth, to ensure it continues to increase. There's the growth economy for you. People cheer when Taiwan is listed as one of the richest places in the world, but if you look at it on a mean, you have a pretty serious gap.
And you felt like when you first moved here, the vibe wasn't like that?
No, it was much more flat, much more egalitarian. There wasn't such a huge thing about, making more and getting mine. It was really like we need to rise together kind of thing. And now if you don't have a certain resource base when you're born, then you're going to have a very different life than those who did. Taiwan has its own very specific set of challenges, but it also has really some very incredible things. More socialized, medicine, healthcare, education. And there's aspects where the money is trying to be used for the greater good.
I guess that's the risk when things become more and more unequal, and then the influence is with the people that have lots of money. Those policies that were for the greater good before might not be emphasized so much.
They can be skewed and changed. Multi-parties would be helpful, so where you have more checks and balances.
Kawenja wasn't enough?
Obviously.
Yeah.